How is everybody tonight? We're getting into the colder weather again, which doesn't make me happy, but it's still tolerable out there. So as we do, I'm here to give you guys an update as to where we stand today. There are a couple of things, actually. I'd say maybe about 45 minutes ago, the judge issued a decision in the settlement, which I'll talk about tonight. And I'll give you kind of a brief overview of where we are generally. So most recently, we had a motion, a hearing on our motion to adjudge Prospect in contempt of court for filing an action with the Attorney General, which we believe was violative of the court's order. The judge heard that hearing last week and stated that he was going to issue a ruling. He did not indicate when. It might be a written decision, as he did today with the settlement, or it could be what's I think some of you have seen before as a bench decision, which is we go to court and he basically tells us from the bench as to what his decision is. But as of right now, there's no anticipated date for the court's ruling on that, and we'll wait to hear on that. We have another motion to adjudge Prospect in contempt for a second action that is going to be heard this Friday, unless it gets continued. But as of right now, it is scheduled for Friday. Because it is pending, I don't want to get into any discussion as to what that's about or what my position is or anything, because we'll have to let that happen on Friday. With regard to the federal lawsuit, all of the parties, most of the parties, not all of them, the settling parties did not, but most of the parties filed motions to dismiss that matter. The court gave us until November 15th, which is in a couple of weeks, a little more than a couple of weeks to respond. And then the parties will have 30 days till December 15th to respond to our response. So we are working on those responses right now. Those will be filed by the 15th. And that will then wait the 30 days for everybody to respond to what we stated. Beyond that, there was, in connection with our motion or our reply on the settlement, the Attorney General filed what's called a motion to strike. So the Attorney General filed a motion saying that some of the things that were stated in the pleading, particularly about him and his staff, went beyond mere commentary and asked the court to strike those portions of the pleading. They filed that motion. There was no hearing set for it. They didn't ask for a hearing. They filed the motion. Excuse me. We will be responding to it. And beyond that, I don't want to really get into a discussion much more about that. Obviously, I think that the motion to strike is I don't think the court should entertain it. And we will respond to it and basically ask the court to deny that motion to strike. That, in essence, won't have much of a impact on what we're trying to do, especially seeing as we have the decision right here on the settlement. But it is still it's still relevant because the issues that we raised in that pleading that the Attorney General has an issue with are issues that we think are real. So in that sense, it has impact on what we're doing. Our next report is at the end of November. Is that correct? I don't know the exact date, but it's at the end of November. Might be the very beginning of December. But that's, from the court standpoint, that's what's been going on right now. November 27th. That's what's going on right now. As is typical, although the hearings on the reports are obviously informative for those of you who come to these meetings on a regular basis, they can sometimes be redundant. But with regard to other hearings, the contempt hearing, the hearing that many of you came to with regard to the settlement, the contempt hearing this Friday, I think it's always important, as far as I'm concerned, for the judge, the court, and also the other parties to see your presence in that courtroom. I know it impacts me. I know that the judge recognizes it and it impacts the court, but I also think it has an impact on those other parties to see that there's a face with this issue, and there are many faces with this issue. So I understand that it may not always fit in your schedules, but I do appreciate those that do come on a regular basis, and I do encourage you to continue coming if it fits within your schedule, because you can't underestimate the impact that sea of purple shirts in the gallery has on the people that are in that hearing. So I want to thank you for that support, which is supporting your own cause, but also indicate to you that it does not go unnoticed and that you should continue. With regard to the settlement, the judge issued a 31-page decision. Like I said, he issued it. It was right around 4:30, 4:45 this afternoon. And I haven't had a chance to read through every aspect in detail, but I am pleased to tell you that the conclusion of the court's decision is that he has approved the proposed settlement and has authorized me to go to federal court and bring it to Judge Smith in federal court, which was always the second step that was required anyway. So he does get into detail on some different issues with regard to the arguments that were made. Like I said, I haven't really read through it. This decision will be posted on the website, most likely tomorrow, so you'll be able to read it yourself. But the long and the short of it, and the most critical thing for me, more importantly for you, is that the settlement with St. Joe's Health Services of Rhode Island, Roger Williams, and Charter Care Community Board, those three defendants, that Judge Stern has approved it, has in essence indicated that it is in the best interest of this receivership of the plan, and has authorized me to go to federal court and present it to Judge Smith over there. I don't think I have to remind anybody that the settlement, from a dollar standpoint, of immediate money that would come over once it's finally approved, is approximately $12 million. And then there are additional rights, interests, and claims that are being transferred as well, which, if all of those are valid rights, claims, and interests, I'm sure you know groups like Prospect are challenging that. But assuming the court disagrees with them, the value of those is somewhere in that same vicinity of about $10 to $12 million. So all in all, with full 100% success on the settlement and pursuit of those claims and those rights, the recovery for the plan could be about $20 to $25 million, which is not insignificant. The $12 million in and of itself is not insignificant, and anything above that is just additional help. I can also tell you on very vague terms, because I can't get into it, I am in the process of significant settlement discussions with another defendant in the case. And obviously, once we have finalized those terms, I'll be presenting that to the court, and that will reveal who that party is. But as of right now, other than to tell you that we are engaged in settlement discussions, I can't give you much more, other than to tell you that it would also be an infusion of what I would consider to be a substantial amount of cash into the plan. So with that pretty much brings me to where we are since in 1 month, which is not insignificant, but it hasn't been as active as it had been in prior months because of all of the objections and discovery. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody had. I do want to address one thing Marilyn raised to me. I guess a number have spoken and said, although this is a very nice venue, instead of renting out this venue once a month, that maybe we find someplace that's a little less expensive. I will certainly look into it, but I will tell you that the people at Rhodes on the Patuxent have been very, very good and very gracious, as have been the audio and the visual people, and that they have, on their own, offered to provide discounted rates. So while we might be able to find a different venue, they have been very generous with the rental for the facility. So it may not be any savings, and it may not be at least as much as it may be worth it to move. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
With that question, could they, to save money, instead of coming every month or 6 weeks, could we come once every 3 months? And that way we'd still stay here.
I'd say, can I have a show of hands? But, you know, for me, when I see the numbers that are here tonight, we've been doing this meeting on a monthly basis. When I see the numbers that are here tonight, that tells me that this evening, once a month, provides value. If I saw the numbers dwindle to a point where it didn't seem like it was worth it, or maybe I could send out a written notice to people giving them the update, then I would do that. Actually, I'm told that costs more money to mail out the notice.
There's 2,700 people, so it's more expensive than coming here.
The other thing I'll say is the reason why I like this format and this process is because I view the 20% of the value of this is for me to give you an update. The other 80% is for whoever is here to be able to ask a question. Maybe I'll say the 70%. And then there's also the value of those that can't be here, either that live locally and just can't get here, or that don't live locally that are able to watch this on YouTube or wherever it's posted. Because those questions are actually the most important, because whoever asks a question on one of these evenings, I know that there's at least a dozen people out there, if not more, that have the same exact question. So unless there was a loud cry to say, Steve, thanks, but we don't want to see you once a month, then I would continue this on the monthly basis. I've talked to the judge about it.
I didn't mean it for any malice. I only meant it to save money.
No, I know, and I didn't take it that way. I'm just joking. But I did speak to the judge about it, and I told him exactly what I just said. I think that there is value. The numbers, it's not an insignificant number of people that come to these meetings, and I know that you have to take time out of your schedule. You have to drive here. I'm sure that this is probably one of the last places that each of you wants to be on a Monday night in November. But the fact that you're here just shows how important all of this is, and the ability to hear an update, but also to have those questions. And I appreciate that, and I'll keep doing it as long as you still want me to do it. Mr. Burgett.
I have a question as to the payment for Max Briscoe, who's done a fantastic job. If it's a settlement, there's a certain percentage. If it's litigated, it's more. Now, at the settlement, there's been litigation. So how will that his fee be computed? Settlement?
Well, the interesting thing, and Max and I have had talks about that recently. The interesting thing about that is Max and I have an engagement letter which talks to his contingency. He is in, at this point, what I will say is I broke his engagement down into 3 phases. The first phase was the investigatory phase where he was paid on an hourly basis. The second phase was what we call settlement in lieu of litigation. So if somebody comes to us to settle the matter before litigation ensued, then there was a certain percentage. And then there was settlement after litigation, which is the realm we're in right now. That said, the engagement letter allows Max a certain percentage for his work at this phase. Max has voluntarily offered to me that he will credit out the hourly fee from his contingency fee. The interesting piece of his fee is that while he and I have an agreement that's been approved by Judge Stern, because there's a class action pending in federal court, Judge Smith has to rule on whether the fee that would be paid to counsel in the class action is fair and reasonable. So arguably, Judge Smith could decrease the fee, could leave it as is. It's unclear as to what the federal court will do based on the circumstances of this settlement at this time. So I kind of look at my fee arrangement is the deal that I struck with Max. It's the deal that the court approved. If Judge Smith says something else, then Judge Smith says something else. But I'm looking at this as he is in that third phase, which is the contingency fee post-litigation. And like I said, he has offered to say every penny that he's gotten paid on the hourly basis during the investigatory period, he's going to take credit off. So that will reduce his percentage by actually a substantial amount. If you look at the settlement as of right now, it will drop. I think the number is somewhere 22-23% that he'd be getting as a contingency. And by applying his fees, it would drop it somewhere in the 17-18 range, which is closer to the settlement in lieu of litigation, which was 16 and change. Any other questions? Yes.
Will the 15% ownership that was discussed on court this past Thursday be any part of the settlement that you're discussing?
It is part of the settlement. So one of the things that the settlement transfers, so that is, the question is there's a 15% interest that Charter Care Community Board holds in Prospect Charter Care. And as of the time of the settlement, it has been the position of Charter Care Community Board that they hold that 15%, and it has value. They propose under the settlement to transfer that right to the receivership estate so that the receivership estate can either liquidate it or pursue it or do whatever we feel is appropriate to be done with it. Prospect Charter Care has challenged that. And as far as I'm concerned, as of right now, we don't really know how the mechanics would play out for it. But the way that I'm looking at it is it's one way or the other I'm getting the value of that 15%. Either I'm getting it through the mechanism of the settlement, which is they transfer it to me and I can pursue it. If a court determines that I don't have the right to pursue it because they didn't have the right to transfer it to me, because that's one of the arguments, that they don't have the right to transfer that to me, then what that means is under the settlement, whatever they don't transfer, then they have to take efforts to liquidate and then give me the money. So one way or the other, I'm going to be getting that interest. It's just a question as to whether I pursue it or whether they pursue it and then hand me the proceeds that are realized from it. Somebody asked me actually before we walked in what the value of that 15% is. At this point, I don't know because I can't get an answer on that from the parties. Charter Care Community Board doesn't know. The only thing I can tell you is that in connection with the 2014 transaction, there are documents in that Hospital Conversion Act file that identify the value of it somewhere in the vicinity of $16 million. Not the entire interest, just the 15%. And so I don't know if it's there, if it's less, if it's more, but at least back in 2014, that was the value. And using that value, one way or the other, I'll be getting that money for the plan through the settlement. Yes?
Do you have a kind of a time frame when federal court will be happening about settlement?
That's a very good question. I'm going to give you the quick answer, and then I'm going to give you what I hope. The quick answer is no. I do not know. The question is there any time frame as to, do I know the time frame in which the federal court will review the settlement and possibly approve the settlement? Is that correct? So the simple answer to that is no, I do not. The federal court timeframes are much different than the state court timeframes. What I can tell you, my best guess is, and this is from both conversations that have occurred with Judge Smith, conference calls among all the parties, is that the motions to dismiss, which were filed in September, I'm responding to within the next 2 to 2.5 weeks, and then there'll be another 30 days thereafter for them to respond, will be heard sometime in January, February. It is unlikely that the judge will entertain the settlement issue before that happens, because the only parties that would have an ability to even weigh in on whether or not the settlement is appropriate are those who remain in the case. And if the judge grants the motions to dismiss to any of the parties, then they'd be out, and it would reduce the pool of parties that can actually deal with it. So I don't see anything happening on that until January, February, until after the court has dealt with the motion to dismiss. Thereafter, based on conversations and comments that Judge Smith has had, is similar to Judge Stern, meaning similar to Judge Stern being aware that time is not on this plan's side and that we need to move somewhat quickly. Of course, working within the federal judicial system and the confines that system may create, Judge Smith is, similar to Judge Stern, acutely aware of the time frame problems and has indicated more than once on conference calls with all parties that this is not something that he has an interest in dragging out for a very long period of time, and he wants to keep very short and strict time frames in place. So I think what we're going to see is once we file our responses to the motion to dismiss, Judge Smith had indicated that he will probably set a conference before the replies are due on December 15th, but after we file ours on the 15th of November. He'll set a conference, and that issue will come up because now we have the authority to go to him. And so the question is going to be, when does that make sense to come, and in what way is that going to come before him? So unfortunately, that's not really an answer because I don't really have one, but I think it probably places us somewhere in the late winter, early spring before the federal court actually addresses it. And then keep in mind, let's assume for the moment, this is all hypothetical because we don't know what Judge Smith is going to do. Let's assume Judge Smith approves the settlement. What that does is that gives me the infusion of the cash that settlement calls for. And then it allows me to then assess whether or not I want to assert the claims and the rights that are assigned over, and that may result in a further argument with other parties. So the only thing that will come over immediately is that cash, and then the other pieces will take their own time as well. Sure. Yes?
I came in late, but so my question is, can we still count on the check for at least another couple of months while we're getting now?
You can. Until I file something requesting that the court amend, which you will have ample notice of, then the checks will continue to go in the amounts that you are entitled to without reduction. And I'm here to tell you, and I think I've said this the past 2 months, I'm here to tell you right now, I have no intention, as I stand here right now, of filing anything asking for that reduction within the next 30 to 45 days. Certainly not within the next 30. So you will know well in advance before it happens. There will be a hearing set down for it. Parties will have the ability to react to it and respond to it if it happens. There'll be an appeal period. So even if I were to file something in the next 30 days, there would not be a change for at least 90, I'd say, 60 to 90 before anything were to happen. But I'm not filing anything in the next 30 days. Yes?
So anything you call back at the state level has to be approved at the federal level by the other judge?
You talk about like the settlement?
Yes.
Yes, because this is a unique situation in that we have a receivership action in state court, and we have 2 class actions, although the state one has been stayed. There's a class action in state court, and there's a class action in federal court. In order to settle the lawsuit with the federal defendants, with the defendants in the federal case, I've got to negotiate a settlement. In order for me, who is I'm a functionary of the superior court, the state superior court, in order for me to do what I need to do, I need to get Judge Stern to authorize me to do it. So in the example of the settlement that I entered into, actually now it's maybe like a month and a half ago, I have to go to the court and say, I entered into the settlement. I think it's in the best interest of the plan. But I have to go to federal court to get it approved, but I need you to authorize me to do it. I can't go there on my own without talking to you first. So any settlement that relates to any claim in the federal case I have to first get authorization from Judge Stern to go to federal court and present it there. I can, if there's a matter that I need to settle that's not in front of Judge Smith, then I just go to Judge Stern, I ask to approve it. If he approves it, we can implement it. But as long as it relates to a claim that's brought in the federal litigation, Judge Stern has to give it that initial approval for me to bring it, and then Judge Smith has to rule on it on the merits. Sure.
As far as you have to settle all the claims before we go to federal court, correct? Like all the different claims that there are?
You mean the ones that I brought in the lawsuit?
Yes.
Well, we're in federal court now. The lawsuit is actually what has triggered some of these parties to come to me and say, we want to settle with you. We don't want to fight in federal court. We don't want to spend the money and the time to fight you in federal court because there's risk in litigation. And although we don't think that there's any merit to your claim, Mr. Receiver, it's going to cost us a lot of money to fight it. And the judge may disagree with us on some level, and we may end up losing money anyway. So rather than go through that, we'd like to settle with you now. Parties don't have to do that. They can go to litigation, full trial, jury, and get a verdict. It's my hope, just for time purposes and everything else, that these parties see it as a better route to sit down and discuss a settlement. Obviously, the settlements have to be something that I think is valuable. There's risk for us as well in going to litigation, just as much as a court can rule against one side, the court can rule against me. And so that risk is what gets those people to the table. It's just a balance of that cost-benefit analysis. How much are you willing to pay to not have to go fight it, and how much risk do you think there is in your claim? So each party has to independently, I've opened the door and said I'm willing to talk settlement with anybody. And I'm willing to talk settlement with anybody. What that settlement ends up being, that's a different story, but I'm willing to talk about it. And some parties have approached us very actively. That's evidenced by the settlement that we brought in front of the court a couple of months ago. Some are actively with me now, and some have kind of thrown out more informal, I guess I'll call them feelers. Would you consider something like this? How about if we talked about something in this context? Is that something that's even worthwhile to discuss? Like I said, I'll listen to anything. The one thing I do not want to do, although I may be persuaded to do it, but as I stand here tonight, one thing I don't want to do with some of these defendants is, let's say I have a defendant where I've got 10 possible claims against them, and they say, oh, well, I'll settle this one with you, but not these other 9. I'm not really interested. I mean, it's got to be a pretty substantial deal for the plan in order for me to settle one piece of the fight. I'd rather, if I have 10 claims against you, we need to talk about all 10 claims and we need to resolve them all. Because if I'm not resolving them all, it doesn't make sense for me to piece pieces away. I'm not saying I'm adverse to it, but it's one thing that I'm more hesitant to do. I don't think it's a valuable use of time.
So do you expect like these settlements to take place before the end of the year?
Certainly the one that I'm currently in discussions with, yes. We're very, very close on that one.
If we're going to federal and yet some of them have not settled, isn't that going to just delay everything?
Well, what's probably going to happen, we've got St. Joe's, Roger Williams, and CCB who have settled. That's what the judge approved today and said go to federal court and let the federal court approve it on the merits of the actual settlement. I've got that other group that I'm talking to that I'm close to finalizing terms of a settlement with, and I believe that will be finalized and presented to Judge Stern in the same exact way that the most recent one was before the end of the year. That's my hope. Beyond that, it's my opinion, I don't know this for certain, but it's my opinion that the other parties who have not approached me with any serious discussions about settlement are holding until the judge rules on the motion to dismiss. Because why would I engage the receiver in a settlement discussion if I think Judge Smith is going to throw the case out for me anyway? Now I'm settling something, and Judge Smith is going to say, "Oh, why did you do that? I was going to let you out of the case." So I think they're holding, they're waiting. Again, those are the parties I think that have contacted me on a very high 50,000 foot level, saying, "Would you consider?" Because they're feeling out whether or not I'm interested in talking. And if I'm interested at a certain level, they may engage in those discussions because it's worthwhile. There's a risk with the motion to dismiss. But it's my belief that the settlement I'm currently negotiating right now will probably be the only one you see before the end of the year, and that the rest you'll see sometime in the mid to late winter, early spring, if there are any. If there are any. Nobody's required to settle. So.
As far as the court on Friday, I wanted to straighten this out. You would prefer to have us there?
If you can be there, I would encourage you to be there. A motion to adjudge a party in contempt is a serious motion. The court puts an order in place, and the order defines how parties can act while the case is going forward. To say that somebody is in contempt of that means that they basically took the order and said, "We don't care." And we knew what the order said, and we still did what we did without any regard for the court's order. It's a serious allegation, is contempt. So that's a party that we say, "Judge, they're not playing by the rules. They're not doing what you said. They're trying to manipulate the circumstance to suit their own needs, try to gain themselves an unfair advantage improperly, and you need to do something." And that behavior is impacting everybody in this room. Because if they're allowed to do it, then it could mean that they gain some leverage and they maybe feel we don't have to settle for as high a number, where they feel empowered that they don't have to do certain things. So this is a message to the court that your order means something, and it should mean something to them, and it doesn't. As you saw with the last one, now we haven't gotten a decision, the judge asked what we wanted as a result of the contempt. And the result was to find them in contempt, to tell them to withdraw what they had filed, and also to direct them to pay $50,000 directly into the plan for the plan. That would not be credited against any settlement. That's punitive dollars that would be paid for that contempt. And Friday is another example where we'll be asking for similar relief and letting the court know that there's a party that we don't believe is acting in accordance with the court's order. So having your presence there, that's a significant event. So if you can be there, again, I understand not everybody can be there. Your schedules may not allow it, but if you can, I'd encourage you to be there. Yes, 9:30 in the morning. And it's Judge Stern's courtroom on the third floor now, which is number 5. So I forgot what the answer was.
Yeah. You talked about parties taking a chance in waiting to see if the judge is going to dismiss their motion to dismiss. What do you think the chances are that the judge is going to do that? The two judges seem pretty reasonable.
Both judges are reasonable. Both are very good judges, very fair judges, very competent. I've been practicing long enough where my staple response is, I never know what a judge is going to do. There are times where I've walked into court thinking that it was absolutely no shot that I was going to lose, and I lost miserably. And there were times where I walked in thinking I had no shot to win, and I walked out with a victory. So it's sometimes difficult to gauge the way a court is going to look at and what they focus on as part of their decision. That said, obviously, I have a lot of confidence in our complaints. Those complaints were not just slapped together. They were substantial documents, and they were the result of over 10 months of investigation. So the allegations and the factual circumstances that were set forth in those complaints were not guesses. That was information that we were able to glean from 1 million pages or so of documents over a 10-month period. I've got a high level of confidence in the claims, and the only thing I guess I will say in addition to that is everybody's filing these motions to dismiss, which is basically saying to the court, these allegations are baseless. There's nothing to this, Judge. They're just throwing...
They say that when they know you've got the evidence.
Well, but not only that, I've got 5 parties that, well, actually more than that. I've got most of the defendants who have called me to say, can we talk on some level settlement? I've got 3 parties that have settled. I've got another group that is looking to settle. And every time that there's a settlement, I believe, judge may tell you differently, but I believe that that sends a message to the judge. Parties aren't willing to settle for significant dollars if the claims lodged against them are baseless and meritless. So what it does is it says to the judge, I think what it says to the judge, is all these complaints, all these allegations that we set forth in this complaint, we've got some parties here that have said, we don't want the risk, so there's enough there, we want to settle with you. So where there's smoke, there's fire, Judge. If they believe that there's enough merit to it, then you probably should look more closely at what we've alleged against the parties that aren't there settling. Motion to dismiss is hard to get by.
So when they settle out of court, quote unquote, does that mean they're not taking responsibility because they're settling up? They're not saying, yes, I did this?
Well, there are some, it depends on how the settlement is structured. Some settlements have clauses in them that say that the settlement is not an admission of guilt by any party or an admission of any wrongdoing, that they're settling it because they believe that the settlement is a more cost-effective way to deal with the situation than the cost and expense associated with going to court. And then there are some settlements that just say, we're settling it. The settlement with St. Joe's, Roger Williams, and CCCB, there's a representation in that settlement by St. Joe's and Roger Williams that say the plan was underfunded for several years, and that underfunding is somewhere in the vicinity of $100 to $125 million. That's acknowledging that there was a problem. So some settlements actually do that. Not everything is we're settling, but you can't hold that against us. At the end of the day, I know that everybody in this room is coming at it from 2 different ways. You're coming at it from, I need my pension, I earned my pension, I want my pension, I need my pension. And then there's the principle of the matter, that the people who put you through this now for, what is it now, we're on like month 14 or 15, and this could go another 15 or 30 months, that the people who put you through that should be held accountable for what they did. I get that, I understand that, but at the end of the day, if I can get the money into this plan that will protect this plan long term, I'm not really concerned about whether or not somebody says, you're right, I did something wrong. As long as the check doesn't bounce, I'm happy with getting the money.
It would be nice, though, if we could see them in jail.
Well, unfortunately, I am an instrument of the civil court, not the criminal court, so I can't put anybody in jail. The Attorney General could. A judge can. Yes.
If there's a movie there,
If-
I'm talking about, I'm being serious. There's a movie made. I think this is awesome.
About this situation.
Are we going to get into the plan? What, this movie is going to be for money when it's on the screen, if people are watching it?
Well, we could talk about the question was, if there's a movie made out of it, can the plan make money off of the movie? And You know, well, that'll be a negotiation of selling the rights to the story. I want to say in who plays each one of us, though. No, you know, in all seriousness, I mean, if obviously the goal is to make the plan whole. And however, obviously we can't make the plan a whole plus. There's no benefit to making it more whole than it needs to be. But as long as we make it whole, I don't really care how it gets there. And I will, I at least hope that you've seen that I and Max and his team are looking everywhere. Places where people say, "What do you do? You can't look at that. What are you doing?" We're looking, and if we can get something out of there, there's no amount of money that is too small. Everything helps the plan, and everything extends the runway for this plan. Whether it's $50,000 or $500,000 or $50 million, it extends the runway. And I'm not shy about taking a check of any size as long as it's reasonable in relation to why I'm getting the check. Because it's going into the plan and it's going to protect your livelihoods that you've earned. Any other questions? 1 second. The new actuary has not yet provided me with numbers. What we are, I have been in regular contact with them. They are currently doing the valuation for the last plan year, and they are working with the auditors to get the audit of the plan done. So, you know, they just came on. Actually, I think officially they were fully on, and all the information had been transferred. Only recently, I think there was an email that I saw last week between the old actuary and the new actuary, which was the first time that I saw an email saying, "I think we've got everything now. If anything comes up, we'll let you know, but I think we have it all." And that was only within about a week and a half ago. So they've been collecting all of this information, both current and historical. I know that they've been responding to inquiries from participants, and they're working to get the valuation done, which they weren't anticipating having to do. I was under the impression, based on emails that said that they were doing it, that the old actuary was actually doing the valuation. And it wasn't until late August, early September that they said, "Oh, no, we didn't do anything with that." So that's why GRS had to jump in on that. But they do know that I need certain numbers, but they needed to collect all the information before they could start doing it and begin doing those other things that I need them to do. So I will be getting updated information from them, and what I expect will be accurate information from them and consistent. And I will be sharing that with both Max and then the group that we had suspended a little bit, the advisory group, but I'll be reconvening that group and providing that information there as well.
I mentioned that there were 3 parties that were willing to settle. Was that right? Or
That's the settlement that the court approved today. So that's... No, so St. Joe's Health Services of Rhode Island, the old Roger Williams, and Charter Care Community Board were the 3 settling defendants that I entered into a settlement agreement with, and the judge approved for me to go to federal court with that settlement today. There are other parties out there that I'm in discussions with, but beyond telling you that I'm in discussions with other parties, I can't give you any more details on that right now. Can't, because that piece is not yet completely finalized. So until we finalize the deal, there is no deal. And so I need to make sure that gets finalized, and then I'll present it to the court.
so can you at least give us an idea? Is it a positive?
The settlement? Yeah, you may have come in late. It's a substantial number. As it stands right now, assuming nothing changes, it's a substantial number. I'm pleased with it. I think it represents a very reasonable settlement. compromise of the issue that we're settling. And I'll be happy to present it to the court, and it is a significant dollar amount.
We'll be voting for a new Attorney General. Does that impact the case? Because, you've got the issues with Kilmarnock.
Yes.
And I have read in the paper that Peter Nerona, if he gets elected, he said he would start full investigation into our pension, issues. So I didn't know if that would impact having a new.
So the question is there's going to be an election coming up in next week, right? Next week. And we're going to have a new Attorney General because the current Attorney General is not running, can't run. So will the new Attorney General impact what's happening in this case? I guess without knowing who the new Attorney General is going to be and what they actually will do once they take office, it certainly won't have a negative impact on it. It's not going to slow anything down. It's not going to change anything that's happened in the past. As far as I'm concerned, the thing that it will do is it will potentially provide me with a little more insight into what happened in that office, because the person who will be occupying that seat will be new and won't have any reason to protect what had happened beforehand, especially if that person thinks that what happened beforehand is improper or incorrect. So in that sense, it could be beneficial to this process. It certainly won't hamper it. At the end of the day, what happened, and the people who did or didn't do something will still be around. They may not be sitting in the same office that they were sitting in, but they'll still be around.
Anything Kilmarnock has brought up or said against, your pension situation, does that automatically get negated on whatever the new one comes into office?
It doesn't automatically get. So the question was, is anything that the Attorney General has said or asserted about the pension, about what we're doing, does that get negated with a new person coming in? It doesn't get negated, but it would be up to that new Attorney General to keep that line of speak going. So if it were, let's just assume for the moment that it's Mr. Nerona who gets it, it would be up to him to decide whether or not he wants to keep that narrative going in the court and whether or not he wants to take the position that his predecessor was taking in the court. He can, if he wants to, it's his office at that point, and he can flip the message 180 degrees, or he can keep that message going straight ahead in the same exact way. It would be up to whoever is occupying that office. Sure. And the pension right now, and I'm going to ask Julie to correct me if I'm wrong on it, I believe it is just under 81 million. Is it 79? 79. 79. And change. I'm looking at that. I have a call set up with the investment advisor. We just set it up the other day. When?
3 weeks.
Is it in 3 weeks? So they're reviewing it. They're going to provide me with a report, and then we're going to have a discussion. The way that I have broken down the investments for the plan, as you know, I think I told everybody that I changed the allocation of things, and I changed the high-lows in what the investment advisor could do. And what I did is I did put it into a more conservative posture because although we were running with a very strong market up till that point, indications were that at the very least, whatever this means, volatility was going to be probably more the norm than it had been in prior months and years. So anticipating that, I set it up so that our investments would be impacted less, depending on how volatile the market is. I'm happy to say that Mercer, this is typically not something that they do. As most people know, when you do investments, these are marathons, not sprints, so you try not to look at the financial pages every day and see kind of those micro movements, which may give you panic on any given hour, depending on if you're looking at the market. Typically, Mercer, when they were dealing with the plan prior to my involvement, would have a call once a year. And they would basically have that, let's talk about the investments and let's see where we are. I'm happy to say that I've told them I understand that the market, it's a long-term investment, it's not a short-term, and that volatility over a short period of time shouldn't be viewed and you shouldn't react to it sometimes. But I want to make sure that I know and they know what's going on, and that if a slight change protects this plan a little bit more, I want to know about it, I want to implement it. So we are taking a much more active role. But right out of the gate in January, we changed the allocation of the investments to a more, not conservative, meaning it's just cash, but to a more conservative investment structure so that substantial changes in the market volatility would have a lower impact on your investment, on the investments in the plan. Any other questions?
Steve?
Yes.
Speaking of the Attorney General, my favorite person in the whole wide world. Anyway, if you recall, at the beginning, when this first started, probably 3 weeks into the receivership, there was a long-term employee in his office that left very abruptly.
Genevieve Martin.
That's the name.
Yes.
Did you talk to her?
I
think she's got info.
We've reached out to Genevieve. We have not yet had any formal discussions with her. Obviously, when we get into the more substantial discovery phase of the federal litigation, additional discovery is going to be had. We've done some document discovery through the receivership process, but there will be more, and there will be depositions and things like that, and parties that we think might shed some light, we will seek to depose them. And I can't tell you whether or not Genevieve would be one of those people, but she's certainly on the list of people that we would at least think about talking to.
She just came to leave very quickly after all this came
She
up.
did, and I'm not going to say that it did not, that same thing didn't run through my head when I saw that exit.
He thinks she has info.
Yes.
Can someone like her be subpoenaed to come in and?
Yeah, actually, if we would serve a subpoena upon her to come in and be deposed. She can ask that she not be if she has a valid reason, and she'd have to go into court and ask, or have an attorney go in and ask on her behalf. But I don't think that she would probably do that. I don't know. But if we ask her to come in, it's likely we're going to be able to ask questions. Absolutely. If it gets postponed, unless it gets postponed because Judge Stern gets sick, which I hope he does not, then I'll know. Today is Monday. Is today Monday? It's only Monday. All right. Today's Monday. I will know probably by Wednesday if anything's going to happen. And if it gets continued, it would only be getting continued if the party who we're seeking to adjudge in contempt asked and the judge granted a motion to continue it. I haven't seen anything yet, so as of right now, it's still going forward. But I will post, as soon as I know something, we'll post it to the website. It is on the third floor, courtroom 5 at the Superior Court building.
So that we're switching buildings now?
Nope, same building. Same building we've been in. Judge Stern is now permanently in courtroom 5, which is on the third floor. So we're not going to be in that other courtroom on the 5th floor that we had been in for a few of these hearings. Now he's got a bigger courtroom, courtroom 5 on the 3rd floor, 9:30.
Regarding the pension
diocesan pension versus going over to the federal. Was that 2014? It should have been transferred over. Was that ERISA or
the difference between being a church plan versus an ERISA plan.
is that still into effect or looking into?
I am still looking into that. I provide the PBGC, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, as well as the U.S. Department of Labor and the Internal Revenue Service with all the pleadings that are filed in the case. They know what's going on. They say thank you every time that they get them. So I know that they are receiving them. And we've stated in the complaint that we think that this plan status as a church plan ended possibly as early as 2009 or earlier. And I still stand by that, and I'm looking into what that means for this plan and what I can do with that for this plan. It's still being investigated. Does anybody have any other questions? Going once, going twice. Sold. Okay. Well, I will see some of you on Friday. I appreciate everything. Thank you. Have a good night. Drive safely, everybody.